Right, and now this week, of course, I did tell you earlier on, we are going to be taking a look at some of the stories that made major headlines this week. Once again, with our economist joining us, it's Ken Gishinga. Now, one of the other top stories that happened this week was, of course, the fact that the Central Bank of Kenya has fined 5 banks close to 392 million shillings, and that is basically over, the transfer and the transaction of fraudulent funds involved with the NYS. Now, many of these banks have actually come out and said that they still have this 14-day period within which to respond, and they have not yet, been tied to paying this money. To what extent do you think they can possibly get away with not having to pay this fine?
I think it was a shocking story because if you look at the 5 banks that were mentioned, they easily control more than 50% of the banking sector in terms of market share. So for them to be implicated in such a situation, I think was quite unfortunate. That said, the banks, as you've said, have said that they need time to respond, they need to look at the specific allegations, and they need to investigate. So I think we have a tough governor. I don't think they have much latitude in terms of getting out of not paying that penalty. I don't think you don't get a tough governor as we do. So I think the window of opportunity for them to wiggle out, I think, is extremely small.
Okay, so some of the allegations, of course, that were put forward was the fact that they're being penalized because they did not do their due diligence when investigating their customers and looking into how these transactions are happening. Now, I understand that banks, of course, have their formats. They go through all of the details of the customers and make sure that they are vetted. But to what degree can we hold them accountable for letting these slip-ups happen?
You're very right. I mean, in my life as a former banker, I'll tell you there's something called KYC, know your customer. Anybody who comes to open an account has to really be vetted in terms of who are they, what's their profession, where do they get their money from, and where do they make their payments to. It's actually a very clear prudential guideline. So the fact that, I guess, understand the competitive nature of the banking landscape has increased over the last few years, but what the governor is reminding these banks is, yes, you are very big, but the regulations apply to both the small and the big. You have to know your customer.
So clearly, thorough vetting and checking of your customer is important. It is essential. And like you said, these are not small banks. These are major institutions which have quite a great percentage of the banking industry which they hold. So what are your final thoughts on this situation? And if you can just give us your closing remarks on this particular story.
I think banks are trying to improve the customer service, and I get that. They don't want to be seen to be bothering the clients too much. But what the regulator is saying, it's important you get all the details because incidents of corruption can easily cost you a major penalty or can cost you a bank. So I think what the governor is reminding them is, yes, improve your customer service. You don't want to be too much in their face in terms of account opening, but you want to make sure that nobody who's dealing with illicit proceeds of crime is walking through your corridors.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Ken Gishinga, for joining us on Business Today this afternoon.
Always a pleasure.
All right. Now,